All right, everybody, and welcome to the live stream interview with Dr. Louis Dit-Sully. I am your host, Theory Pleeb, or just Pleeb, or Dave. Welcome, Doctor.
Sorry, welcome. We're live now.
We're live now, yeah, yes.
I'm very bad with those things. Yes, thank you. Welcome to...
Yeah, I was like, we're going live now, and I think it was just because we had been talking for a little while, so it felt like nothing had changed, right? But I've the starting soon thumbnail had been playing for probably 5 minutes, so a few people have already joined us. Welcome everybody in the chat. I'm really excited for this conversation. So I'll just say a couple of things as a sort of introduction, and then I'll let you kind of expand on the introduction. But Dr. Louis Dit-Sully, Louis Dit-Sully. I was in the habit of saying Louise until you told me no, it's Louis because it's French. Dit-Sully. Yeah, it's French.
So you don't pronounce the T of the dit. So Louis Dit-Sully.
Oh, D. Oh, okay. Louis Dit-Sully. It'll take a little bit to get used to that.
That's okay. I'm used to all kind of distortion of the name.
Yeah.
You call me Dit-Sully, it's Louis Dit-Sully. But anyway, you can call me Christine. That's much easier.
Fantastic. And so there's a few reasons that I've been really excited to talk with you. I think the main one is I wanted to give people in my audience and in my life more generally an opportunity to hear you, to hear your perspective, to be able to think about things, because there's been a lot of conversation on race in the last few years. Do the work has become a kind of meme, and often when people say that, I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that. Often it's read one of these bestsellers, one of these popular bestsellers that talks about racism or anti-racism or anti-black racism, identity politics, CRT. You know, there's all these different kinds of buzzwords that circulate today. And a lot of the people who enter the discourse are coming from the sort of either from the establishment Democrat versus Republican spectrum, or a little bit broader than that, but still kind of presuming a lot of the same frameworks, the media sphere here in the United States. Well, I think that there's a lot of ways that that's limited, and that you have kind of shown a light on all of that in your own ways. But one thing I wanted to highlight is that you have 2 PhDs, and that you spent a lot of time with the first one in the hard sciences before getting another PhD in somewhere in the humanities. Is that right? And so I think that you bring a lot more to the conversation. I've been rereading your book Transcending Racial Divisions, which was published by Zero Books last year, and it's you spend a lot more time on the history of the development of racial thinking and racism as 2 separate things that are obviously related, and how this developed through the sciences. But more importantly, you talk about its development as something that is specifically historical and social and political. I'm wondering if you would like to add anything to the introduction there about yourself, or if I should just jump straight into the questions.
I mean, about myself, no, and I'm not. I mean, I think it's in the book. I mean, how I started to. Maybe I could say how I started to be involved in the discussion or something, no? Or,
right. So what was your...
Or do you want me to do personal? Because I don't talk much about personal life, so...
Well, I guess I did want to touch a little bit on personal stuff before we move into it. And I guess the main thing I would ask is, have you lived, studied, or done any kind of research in the United States?
Lived, yes. I mean, research, yes. I mean, like you said, I was... my first career was in science. I was a research biologist, and so I did my study actually in science in what you call natural sciences, where in Britain, I mean, I study also in France, but in France was completely different. I study agronomy, so science of agriculture. Then I study. I'm somebody who study a lot. Some like my parents say was you keep having an accumulation of diploma. So I study in France, and then I study in England, both the first and the second degrees in biology, and then so I did my PhD in England, and then I did my first postdoc, several postdoc in America. So I live in America for about 6 years. And then I went back to Europe, and I did a work again in research in Germany, and this is where I am now in Germany. And I decided to leave science, the bench research science, and concentrate more on researching ideas, because this is what interests me, is researching ideas more widely than just hard natural sciences. So more, in the beginning it was more science and politics. And then I decided to do a second PhD because it gives you access to universities. This is the things about free speech and all that kind of access to knowledge, because when you want to do research, it's very difficult to do it as an individual. A lot of the academic papers and a lot of academic journals are very expensive to have access to. So I decided to do my research through another PhD, and then I started on race. I always been, of course, race has always been an issue for me, one way or the other, personal and political, because I used to be what you call a hard left revolutionary communist. So race and racism has always been an issue in that sense, but I've never wanted to have it as a subject that, at least when I was younger, when you're black, people will think, well, you're doing research or you're doing your study on race, on racism. That was always something that people was kind of stereotype. If you're black, you might be interested in the issue of racism. And so I refuse to be stereotype on that issue. The reason why I'm doing it now is because I started to be a little bit tired of some of the ideas coming back and creating more of a problem than anything else. And this is what I wrote in the book. In the beginning, I felt like I was starting to be seen as Christian, as an individual, and then now I'm starting to be seen again as a black woman with specific ideas. And this is how I started to be involved in the issue of race again. So, and I did my PhD on the identity politics on race. I'm talking a lot, huh?
Yeah, you're doing a great job.
Well, I can talk a lot. But anyway, several things. There is some personal stuff and some political stuff who made me decided to do a PhD on the identity politics and identity politics, and I decided to concentrate on racial identity. I could have also done on women identity or sexual identity, but I decided to do identity politics and racial identity, and looking at why black students, for example, were wanted to ask for safe space and how they see anti-racism, and this is how I started. But the book is really an initial book. It was more of a I wrote it because it was more of a reaction to some of the ideas. It's not my research. My PhD is a bit further than that. It was more of a me saying, hold on a minute, we are going wrong. I don't want to be seen again as only a black woman with a specific point of view. This is not anti-racism. That's what the book is about.
Right.
We need to go back to something different.
Yeah, you talk in the book about having how this idea of you're a representative of the group. You're supposed to be a mouthpiece for a group now, meaning that your ideas are not qualified as good or bad ideas, but instead as whether or not they're the appropriate ideas to be expressed by your identity category.
Exactly. I found it absolutely patronizing. It's useful for some people, but I found it also patronizing to when you talk about race now, it's like, oh, you're a black woman, so you must know about racism and anti-racism or race issue, simply because you experience racism. So it's basically kind of they don't look at me like whether or not my point of views are right or wrong. They're just kind of looking at me as a category, a member of groups, and automatically my point of views are being taken as special compared to everybody else. And it's a bit like a pat in your head. So yeah, we know about it. You know about these things. And for me, it's also really not only patronizing, but also against any. If you're interested in making the world better, it's really against knowledge and against understanding the world and against making things better, because basically you're saying that something that is given to my race is telling me what's right and what is wrong, and you cannot have any more discussion. There is quite a lot of ideas that really kind of started to annoy me, and that's how I started to try to understand what's happening with this racial identity. I have to say that when I started to do the research, I'm European, so I always thought naively that the idea of race was already, everybody knew that race doesn't exist as biology category. For me, it was also because not only a European, but I'm a scientist. So as a scientist and a European, the idea of race as a biological category for me was just like old 20th century, before the World War II. Right. When I started to read about what's happening in America, I was quite shocked, because a lot of I'm not talking about the books, but more ordinary Americans or people who are online discussing race as a biological category. And I realized that there was a lot of the issue that I thought was already moved on was still important in other part of the world, especially in America. I mean, the idea of race as a biological category is still very much believed in some corners in America, which was quite of a naive. I wasn't naive, but it was kind of a shock. And so that's why I started to do the book as a way of challenging that too.
And was that is that idea that race is a real biological category? Is that something that you were seeing on the left as well?
It's not. They don't. It's not on the left as such. It's more like a lot of people will say race is a social construct. So you have the people more on the right who say it's a biological construct, and then you will have some left who say race is a social construct. But when you look at what they are saying, it's the same as the biological construct. So, for example, they will argue not, and it's not only left-right. It's not. I don't think it's a strong left-right issue. But when people are arguing for a social construct, especially the social sciences, when you look at them, they're arguing it's a ancestry. So ancestry, what is ancestry at the end of the day? It is biology. Your father and your mother and your grandmother, i.e. your blood. They will say it's the cultural, and so that's what also look at in the book. They're making it cultural as if it was something really fixed and determined and innate. Innate is innate in English. So it's not a left or right. It's more like the biological construct, you can find it still left and right, and then the social construct is very much understood in the same way as the biological category. So basically, the problems for me is that the idea of race is very much present in the 21st century, where I thought that it has been. It was only a few. I always thought that it was a minority of people who wanted to keep the race issue, but in fact, the race is still very much seen as real in the sense of race is real, but in the sense of innate or outside humans' actions. I'm trying to say it's. When I argue against the race being a biological category, I'm still saying race is a reality, but it's a reality because it has importance in our real world. Right. But when people are talking about so it has consequences. You cannot just say, well, let's forget about race, because race the fact that I am a black and you're white makes a difference in our experience of the world and in our life, yes?
Right.
So race is real in that sense. But for me, you have to understand that it is not a biological or scientific category, but it's the product of a social world. So it's a social, it's historically specific, because it depends on the history. It's socially specific, and it's also politically, but it's a social and historically specific product.
Right.
So it's not innate, it's not God-given, it's not natural. It's a product of history and of our social world, our society.
Right.
And that's what we have to challenge. We have to understand that to be able to challenge racism. Am I clear?
I think so, and I think something that you said is, and let me see if I'm getting it right, is that even when the people will say, oh, it's a social construct, it's a cultural thing, it's not this rigid biological category that was invented by these scientific racists, blah blah blah, which is a very standard thing to hear, I think, from a liberal left kind of identity politics position when it's anti-racist, is oh, it's social construct and stuff. There's still a lot of the kinds of the baggage of that other way of thinking, that where it's race essentialism either way. Maybe we were calling it, race essentialism can say, oh, it's because of biology, or it can say, oh, it's because of culture. But either way, it's essentialist, it's reductive, and it's deterministic, I think. Right. Mm-hmm. And so
exactly. I mean, they look at race in a very ahistorical way, trans-historical. That's the reason why you have quite a lot of books trying to argue that race existed throughout human history, and this is not true.
Right.
The way people see each other, the way people see each other and see themselves, is historically specific and socially specific. Socially specific not only because of the different society that we have throughout human history, but also from different society across the world. People do not see themselves in the same way in different society. And people do not see themselves and see each other the same way throughout history. And race is, in fact, a notion that was developed only in the 18th, 19th century, fully developed in the 19th century. And the meaning of race had a lot of, the race has several meanings throughout history.
And I think you spend more time perhaps in this book than in a lot of the books I've read on the topic, going through actually how different these reconceptualizations of race have been over the course of, especially modernity. You're focusing on the development of this term through modernity, and yeah, you really get into the history a lot. I was learning a lot yesterday, going over it again.
An offer you should. I wrote it on the beginning of the book. I'm advertising another offer, but. The author that I'm relying very much on is Kenan Malik.
Right.
If you really want to, for me, it's one of the best author on race. He has one book. It's called The Meanings of Race. Yeah, The Meaning of Race.
Yeah, right. You've cited that a few times in here, I think. And
and so he's basically looking at the different meanings throughout the history of racial thinking. He also had quite a few books, and he's got one who's going to go out and publish in January next year. I'm advertising him at the same time. But anyway, you have a few people who do write to show you how the notions of race is historically specific and also socially specific. And he's one of those, and his books are bigger, so he's got more information about the developments of the issue of race. But I wanted the book, the reason why I did that is because for me, you cannot fight anti-racism if you still believe in the issue of race. But there is a difference between me and other people, because some people were saying, well, are you colorblind? I'm not colorblind. I do not support the issue of colorblindness, because colorblind is basically saying, if you forget about the issue of race, if you forget about basically racism, things will be better. And I'm not talking about intellectually or psychologically forgetting about the issue of race. I'm saying that we have to transcend the notion that the world can be divided into race.
Right.
So it's not a psychological or in problems or an educational problem. It's a political problems, but also it's a intellectual problem in the sense of the way we understand humanity. The way we understand humanity, the way we understood humanity in the past, and the way we understand humanity today. And today we understand humanity through the issue of race, and that has to be challenged. And unless to challenge that, we cannot fight racism, because racism will also change throughout history and throughout society. It will still exist as long as you have the issue of race.
Right. And so
am I clear?
You are. I think you're doing a fantastic job. And anybody in the chat, if it's not clear, because for me, maybe it might seem more clear to me than it would to somebody in the chat. And so that's one of the wonderful things about being able to do this live is if it's clear in my head because I actually spent some time doing the reading and all of this stuff, but it's not clear for you all, go ahead and ask that. But I do have in my mind, in this conversation, a lot of people in my life who want to do the right thing. That they don't want to be racist, but more importantly, they don't like racism. And so there's currently different perspectives on how one ought to be against racism, and that those kind of hinge on how one defines racism. And I think you've kind of given hints in that direction so far, but I want to reframe the whole thing by putting a specific question forward. And I actually wrote this one down. I said, so people today, especially workers in my life, say things have never been so political. And I believe you say something quite the contrary in your work, that the culture war, with its focus on identity and culture and race, is anti-political. So I'm curious about your usage of this term, anti-politics, and what you would say to those workers in my life who are saying everything has become so politicized.
It's because I do not understand I do not have the same understanding of politics. So what I mean by anti-political is that the fact that those issues are becoming a part of politics, it means that they're destroying politics. And so when people are complaining that things are being politicized, in fact, that's what they are saying, and what I also agree, is that they are those things that are politicized should not be politicized, and that it becomes anti-political. So I'm following the idea in a way more than anything else. So for me, politics is about I have to do more research on that, but for me, politics it's a human notions. It's purely a human notion. It's for humans to be able to understand the world and create a world that is better for themselves. So it's they're going to go against nature and create a world together that makes it better. So there is always this ability for humans to think rationally and imagine something that will be better for themselves. Yes. So if you have politics today that is about, for example, whether or not you should sleep with your sister or not, or your brother, kind of, those very, or how much vegetable you should have on a plate for your kids, this is not politics. But this is what is seen as politics today. So what is seen as politics today is basically discussions about human basic needs, necessities, everyday life, people's interrelationship, relationship between race, and that is not what is politics. That's why I say it's anti-politics, because it's also anti-human too. If you in the book I look at how racial identity is a development, an anti-human development, and being anti-humans is also anti-political, because politics is a human. Politics was developed at least from the Greek, and it was as a way of basically you realize that you can create a society that goes away from the natural world. So it's a separation between the natural world and the social world. And if you bring politics back to the natural world and how we should live and how we should go to the toilet and eat and put our clothes on, you're going back against the notion of politics itself. And racial identity is also that. In the politics, you look at rational human beings making decisions, understanding the world rationally, making decisions about what there should be. Racial identity is saying that we are determined by our race. It's anti-political, it's anti-human, it's also anti-political.
It's anti-human.
So racial identity is definitely anti-human. 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 So you're speaking American word, but yes.
Well, and I like the you bring up in the book this idea of humanism a few times, and then you actually clarify it very importantly, because some people take humanism to simply mean it's having morality without God, right? Or a secular kind of worldview. And you're saying, no, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean by humanism. What I mean by humanism, and let's see if I get this right, was that it's about humans have the potential to reason. Humans have the potential for freedom. Humans have the potential to work together in ways that transcend our mere biology and that transcend mere, the reproduction of our bare life or of necessity. And so it's not just about survival of the fittest. It's not just about this group winning at the expense of another group. That those are anti-human in the sense that they have nothing to do with reason. They have nothing to do with freedom, and they have nothing to do with working together. Is that what would you say that's your definition of humanism?
Yeah, for me, humanism is the notion of humanity having the capacity to think about the world, about themselves, about nature. So there's their social world, natural world, and about themselves, and to make decisions and challenge that. So they have possibility to change the world around them and to change themselves. And this is so basically humanism is based on the very specific notion of human that is not accepted today. And it's not accepted if you have a world where you have racial identity, national identity, cultural identity, sexual identity, or actually all these things, or the fact that we are determined by our biology. You have a notion of human that is, for me, anti-human, because you restrict it. You're basically saying that we are determined. Don't get me wrong. There is also a problem with the determined. I'm talking about causal determination, yes? Because we are determined in life. There is things that we have to... we are influenced by our biology. We're influenced by the world that we're living, so we are determined. But I'm talking about causally determined by something. So the racial identity is saying that because you're black, you think that. Because you're white, you think. For example, this idea, because you're white, you're racist. This is causal. So you're white, racist. Black, anti-racist, yes? I'm talking about, but we have a determination. Human are determined in the sense that there is several things that determine our world. We don't make our world. I mean, you're born in 21st century, you haven't chosen it. And you're born with a certain specific point of view from certain families, so you're determined, but not causally determined. And so you have a point of view today that human, that is anti-human in the sense that they are preventing this idea that humanity can be in control of their destinies, that we are rational beings that can basically make decisions about ourselves and about the world. And humanism is basically it has to be based on this rational human beings, basically, that is not there. So we have the potential to create something that is not natural, that is not God-given.
Perfect. And there's a Soda Cabbage in the chat says, I love that. Politics being when we reflect on and change our world, not naturalizing what exists as biologically determined. Soda Cabbage also asked a question that I think probably fits really well here in the conversation. It kind of goes back to something that had come up a little earlier. about the social construction aspect of all of this. The question goes, what are some of the ways race is constructed as compared to how it was constructed or perceived in the past?
What are the ways?
So, what are some of the ways race is constructed as compared to how it was constructed or perceived in the past? I think part of the reason that might be confusing is because you had actually said race didn't exist in the past.
Okay.
Right.
That's
and
what
so how has this idea emerged in history, and how has it changed? Is probably another way to say it.
Okay, when you look at because when very often when you said that race didn't exist in the past, people will say, well, yeah, there was a lot of people who were different. When you're arguing that the race is not a scientific or biological category, what you say, it doesn't mean that people were not different from, they didn't look different, or they didn't form different cultural groups. So human variation is one of the beauty of humanity. For me, it is one of the beauty of humanity. Human variation and human complexity is the beautiful part of humanity that I love. But the way that people seeing in the past, the way people lived, for example, in the Greek, it wasn't based on the issue of race. It was based on the in fact, for them, when they were looking at differences, they very often saw differences through the environment. They will say that there were some people of black skin because it was hot in their country. So they decided that if you are black in a hot country, then you could become white in a colder country. So there was nothing fixed about the way that they understood the different biological aspect of it. But it was more of a community things. People understood, and people saw human variation. This is not something that you cannot go away from seeing it. But you don't have to divide humanity into groups of fixed races, and that you are arguing that the biological differences between different groups can explain people's mental, physical ability, intellectual abilities. This is what race is about. It's basically saying that you can divine groups of people, and then this definition that is biological or ancestry can causally explain people's mental ability, intellectual ability, physical ability, or even musical ability or whatever, artistic ability. This is how they do it. Black people can understand rhythm. Really? I mean, there's something about your black skin that makes you more rhythmic. I mean, I grew up with this idea that somehow if you're black, you know about dancing. I can assure you, as a young kid, I was quite stressful because I'm more intellectual than a dancer. So at 6 years old, I was forced to know how to dance because black people know how to dance. That's what I was told. Somehow there was something about me that makes me want to go dancing. Say, I love dancing now, but you know what I mean. It's somehow that some races, the race that you belong to can causally determine your mental, intellectual, and musical ability or artistic ability or whatever. And that's what is race. And in the past, in the Greek or in other history, people did not see it that way. They were looking at cultures. The barbarians, for example, for the Greek, were as much people from the north, the North European, the white, as the black in Africa or other people around them around the Middle East. So, in fact, when you look at history, we went from the Greek who look at citizenship. So for them, it was like to be citizen was the highest part of being a human, to religion. So then you end up being, you separated the people into religious, so the religious community. Today we are into racial community, and this is sad. How we separate, how we see the world through a race. And this is what, and in this idea of seeing the world through race started in the 17th, 18th century, basically pretty much 18th century, when we started to develop this notion that we can see the world through the notion of race, but also through the notion of race competition, because that's what racial thinking is to divide the world into races and to think that the world and history can be understood through racist competition. And that's started with the 18th century and America and Europe and yeah. In fact, when you look at the meaning of race, I'm talking again. At some point, race was used to explain the inequality between the upper class and the lower class. So the poor people were from different races, from the aristocrat, for example. So race wasn't only about color. I can't hear you.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sometimes I talk for a long time and then people realize, no, you're not talking. Get it right. This brings up the idea that well, of course, black people are poor because they've been historically disadvantaged, and white people who are poor, well, I mean, they're just, wow, well,
lazy.
if you have all that privilege and you still can't make it work for you, then what the fuck is wrong with you? You must be a real idiot,
Yeah, you're not working hard enough, yes?
Yeah. Save and invest better, This is, I remember, gosh, I was pretty early to political things and made the mistake of going on Twitter, and I saw somebody on there, the quote unquote, this person was part of quote unquote Black Twitter, and she was saying basically she was saying exactly that. She was saying that it makes her sick to think of a white person having all of that privilege and not being able to use it to leverage out of their situation. And so she was disgusted by this idea that we need to care about these people. And that was, obviously that's a minoritarian position. I don't think that's I don't even think someone like Robin DiAngelo or Kimber Max Kendi is, I suspect, smart enough to not say something like that. But it's one of those moments when a person says it and then people kind of just like laugh at it or something like, haha, that kind of tells you something. It's like, this is, if it's not normalized, it's at least kind of like, oh, it's funny. There's nothing funny about poverty though. And that's what's so upsetting for me is like, this is, it's not a joke, poverty. And that the idea of it has been so heavily racialized now that almost you can't even talk about poverty without, on the liberal left, without saying, well, this disproportionately impacts X, Y, and Z categories, as though we only should care about it because it's disproportionately impacting some minorities. And it's like, well, let's just say that poverty wasn't disproportionately impacting minorities. Would we still care about it? I hope, I hope it would still be like the issue.
But one of the problems with these things, I can understand your frustration, but I don't do politics to, and I can also understand that. A lot of people would be show a lot of resentment because of those kind of ideas. This is not my. I don't support any politics of resentment. What I call it, because that's what some people do. I think the problems with those ideas is that it's that you basically putting the blame on the social problems onto a category of people. So basically, you're doing also, first of all, you're doing the reverse of what the racists are arguing, because you're saying that because you're white, you have somehow some specific attitudes, which you used to say that for minorities. And then you are arguing that for some reason, the white poor are basically chosen to be poor, and despite their privilege. 2 points. Privilege, the idea of privilege, white privilege, is wrong. It's putting the issue of racism in the other way around. The problem of racism, is that some minorities did not have equal rights. Yes? The problems of white privilege is that for some reason, when you have rights, you are privileged. So you're putting the notions of racism in the other way around. So that's why you could end up having a white child starving to death, and you can still talk about white privilege. You can be dead and you still be about, unless you're, well, I mean, dead because you'll be, maybe you lose your privilege, but just by starving, you will have a little bit of white privilege simply because you're white. So what you're basically saying is that having rights or having the ability to live properly in society is a privilege, and that somehow what we want is to have the black to have privilege, when it's the other way around. What we and what other minorities were asking is the equal rights. So the right to be able to have a job, or the right to be able to have civil liberties. It was to be able to have the right that you did not have. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Is that the white privilege put the racism in the other way around. It is not a privilege to have rights.
I think I understand, but I also know what someone would say to that. They'd say, okay, so so I'm going to play devil's advocate. I understand that you're saying it should not be seen as a privilege to have basic human rights. That basic human rights are not a privilege; they're basic human rights. But then the people who would say this are going to say, well, no, but the idea of privilege is more of this cultural category. It has to do with, you walk into a room of white people, you don't have to worry about what you're going to say or how you're going to be seen as or treated differently because of, you're assumed to be neutral, or you're assumed to be like everyone else, right? Whereas if you come into that space and you are obviously different, then everyone's going to be like, oh, what's this person going to say? And then think that everything you say is, see it all through this other lens. And they'll say, well, then, people take this kind of privilege for granted. Oh, it's easy to walk into rooms, full of white people, right? Like,
but the privilege is the other way around. When you talk about white privilege, you're arguing, basically saying that the fact that you go into a room and you're not discriminated against is a privilege. It's not a privilege. It's what you're supposed to have.
Right.
And the people who really have privilege, for example, the black rich, the black upper class have privilege. They have the privilege of, even if their rights are, for example, are discriminated against in some bylaws or whatever. I'm talking about the minorities were discriminated against. Even if there are groups of people were discriminated against, they have the privilege of being protected from the discrimination because they were upper class. So right. The people who really have the privilege, actually the class, with class, and are completely forgotten. And now the fact that you have the proper skin is seen as a privilege simply because you have the rights you should have, or the ability to be able to be free is seen as a privilege. It's for me, it's a bit like saying that you have this, and then everybody underneath is right, and then everybody has the standard got privilege, and it's the other way around. So when you talk about white privilege, you also is aware of hiding the people who really have the privilege. Because right. If you're black Obama, for example, I'm sorry to say you don't really have too much of a problems of racism, in that sense that you can go further than other people. Because if you have the money, if you have the position, social position, you can do things that other people will not be able to do. You can do more than sorry, my husband and my dog. You can do, he's going out, so I need to know he's going out with the dog, life carry on. But, it's basically, it's a way, for me, it's this discussion about white privilege. It's a way of preventing us to fight against racism.
Right.
It's not only that, but also against a way of challenging the social order that we live. It basically a way of hiding the real social issue, the problems of society, because basically saying it's all about individual. It's an individual skin, and you don't see the social, basically social system that creates those divisions. It's not seen anymore. I mean, this white privilege thing is just. for me, it puts us, it puts the people against each other for no reason. Well, yes, for a reason, but I mean, that puts us against each other when in fact it should be the other way around. We should be able to challenge the issue of race or racism together.
Right.
But you separate with the white privilege and. So I'm not denying that we have different experiences. Don't get me wrong, but this is not a privilege to have rights.
Right.
It's a privilege,
but it's an injustice if you do not have those rights.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, that's what anti-racism is about. At least in the past, it was to be able to. So if you are an African American, yes, and you are after slavery, you when you fight against slavery, you fight for freedom. So basically, you saying, I want the freedom that other people do not have. Do have. So I want the same freedom as everybody else have. Then when you were free, and when the African American were free, they wanted to have equal rights, the ability to be able to go to a job and said, it is my skills, can I have this job because I'm the best one. So they wanted to have the right that others were having. It's not as if the other people had the rights. They were living in not proper way, but they have a certain life. The black or Native Americans or other minorities did not have those rights. They were asking for the right the same way as everybody else. Today, now they are saying those white people have a good life because they have rights. And basically, when you look at the demands, now they are saying white people should be feeling guilty and to blame. So by saying those white people with the rights have privilege, now you're saying, well, maybe we should have less privilege so that we can give it to other privilege. So basically, you're putting everybody else down. You don't challenge racism. You're just basically putting everybody else in with less rights in one way.
Right.
It's really going in the wrong direction, and it's nothing to do with the left. I mean, the white privilege for me is nothing left. It's conservative politics.
Now,
and most of the left have conservative politics.
And what was the last part?
Conservative politics.
Oh,
I'm saying the left is the left that especially in America, the progressive, the left, the progressive, is conservative politics, reactionary conservative politics.
Right.
And they're calling themselves left, but it's nothing to do with improving the world or a better world or transforming. It's a politics that keeps the status quo. For me,
well, and it's not even new, which is, for me, everyone's saying, oh, you're white, so you need to shut up and sit down and you need to listen and you need to read. Ever since I've been involved with politics, I've taken, I think I used to take that very seriously and to heart and be like, yes, that is what I should be doing. And I will listen and I will listen and I will keep reading. And then in 2020, seeing what had been some kind of a ostensibly working class social democracy movement through Bernie kind of turn into this, there was no longer any positive vision for the future. It was we just need to lock down the world. Everyone needs to get the vaccine and the BLM protest. And so being in the middle of locking down and all of the political focus turning into this form of protest, I was doing a lot more reading than I had been on this specific issue. And that's when I'd say it was probably about another year before I read your book. But I read a bunch of other books that set me up to be like, well, I don't think that this moment is as hopeful as people are making it out to be, because the demands on the table, the main demands being made through these protests these are not really like leftist demands. These aren't even like demands for any kind of real freedom, defund the police. what? That's not a, that is not, there's not a future in this, you know? And one could say, well, abolish. Yeah, well, it's not, it's so impractical because it comes with, well, okay, so we're going to still have capitalism, but without a public police force. It'll just be privatized, right? Like, people are thinking that these kind of demands exist outside of the system that we live in. And so, you know, it seemed inherently confusing. Like, I couldn't make sense of it. But there's also a big gap between what some influencers involved in the movement and some activists or leaders in the movement will say, which is, you know, oh, this is actually about an anti-capitalist thing, and actually, you know, in order to really combat systemic racism, what we're really talking about is capitalism, versus what was being said by the mainstream figures of BLM, by the mainstream movement itself, the organization that has the about page on the website, that it doesn't say anything about capitalism. It just, it basically says, you know, bring a few more black people into the upper class is kind of what it said. And so I think it was when I read your book, you brought together a lot of these other ideas. I still haven't read, is it Malik?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have not read
Malik?
Yeah, I have not read him yet. I look forward to doing so, but it's been a struggle though, being able to make sense of it all. I guess I want to kind of bring it back around for a moment. And by the way, chat, I will check in on chat. I will make sure to look at the questions and everything, and if they fit into the conversation, I'll make sure to bring those up at some point. But I wanted to for those there's actually a joke. One of the people I live with, I live out on a farm 45 minutes from Boise, which is a city out in Idaho. And, you know, so there's a bunch of goats and sheep, and, you know, the dad of the family here, I
nearly thought you said the dad of the goats. I was like, oh my God.
No,
please.
The dad of a different kind of kid. Yeah. You know, there's a family that lives here, and I've got my tiny house on their premises, because they're just letting me live here while I get some things figured out, with my living situation, which is great. It's really freeing me up to be able to do things like this. But he made a joke. He said, well, just, you know, I have a question for her as an Idahoan. What is race? I thought it's just white people, you know. He's joking because Idaho's not super diverse. Boise, a bit more so, you know, and Boise State University, a bit more so. Obviously, I was able to get involved with, like, the Center for Diversity and Inclusion when I was there. I was able to get involved with the Black Student Alliance. I was able to get involved with the Black History Museum and all these other kinds of groups. And that's where I did a lot of my sitting and listening and, you know, just trying to listen or whatever. But I mean, even though he's joking, he's getting at something. And I think that what he's getting at is that a lot of people in not just Idaho, but just states that don't really even purport to have political power. There's a lot of states where people don't actually feel like they have. Obviously, if you think you have political power because you live in California, you're probably delusional, right? You don't really have political power. You're an individual in a state of millions of people, and the system is not made to, you know, have little people have a voice, right? Which I think is your definition of democracy, is people being able to be engaged in the political process. Well, but
it depends on your class.
Depends on your class, exactly. And in Idaho, there's not a lot of people who are able to really have much sway in at all. It's going to be a red state, and there's nothing you can do about that. So even if you thought that voting the other way would make a difference, it's not, I mean, at the end of the day, you're not going to. And so most people, in my experience, are apolitical in their minds. They think that they are apolitical, or they try to avoid politics. And a lot of them try to avoid controversial topics. And I think that was something I realized coming out of college was speaking of privilege, there's a kind of like, if you live in the university environment and you are kind of ascendant in the social order, you think, oh, we can all talk about this. We can always have conversations about these controversial issues. Yeah, not if you work a regular job. Not if you're just a regular working class mother who has to be around a lot of other kinds of people who have all kinds of different opinions. It all of a sudden becomes a liability to have a strong position on anything. And so this whole idea that, oh, you have to stay informed, I think a lot of people would prefer not to, because there's a sort of social liability if you're working class. It'll get you ostracized by other people in the workplace. Maybe your manager or your boss or something like that will, in their head, they'll write you off and want to get rid of you, and so.
Yeah, but that's, it's because of the censorious climate that we live today.
The censorious.
But I think it's related to, censorship and the inability to talk about issues has always existed, at least within capitalism. When I was young, I would not mention the word racism at work, even if I suffer from a racist manager, because I had manager. I lost jobs because of manager, especially one, because of he didn't like me, the fact that I was black. He found out that I was. He wasn't the one who hired me, but he is the one who managed to get rid of me. So, but you wouldn't mention that because, especially also in science, you wouldn't mention that because people will see you as the complaining one, the troublemaker. Right. So there is always issue. People don't talk about race at work today, black and white. In the past, I could not talk about race or racism because I would be seen as a troublemaker. Or you couldn't talk about women rights because you will see as a troublemaker in science also.
Right.
But there is a censorious climate today, and I think it's related to this issue of politics and identity politics, and how politics is seen today is seen very much as a personal identity, basically. So if you have point of view, people, and it's opposite a point of view of somebody else, they will see it as a personal attack to themselves, to their self, to their inner self, to their person. And this is how people react much more violently than they do in the past. People didn't see politics as such a personal part of their emotions, and it wasn't as much of a part of their identity than it is today. But the race, I'm sorry, but the race in America is an issue that is just horrendous. Every time I get involved with some people, some American discussing race, it's just like, I'm sorry, but the race issue in America is just. And I have to say, I said to my friends, the one who lives in America, because I have friends in America since I lived there. And I said to them, I wrote a book on transcending racial division, but you don't need to discuss it at work, because seriously, you don't need to have trouble because of me, because it's such a horrendous, and it's a very, very wild, emotionally, very. And I think it's sad because it prevents people to discuss issues and understand the world. If you cannot discuss ideas, you cannot change the world.
Well, this is a good sort of segue back into what I was kind of painting, this picture of people who don't really want to get involved, don't want to really touch these issues. If most of the people in your life are Democrats who are talking about anti-racism all of a sudden, then it wouldn't be too much of a social liability to at least talk about that. Now, you might not want to talk about capitalism, but you can at least maybe talk about that. But what I've experienced is that a lot of people actually just tune it all out and kind of keep their head down and focus on the task at hand, like raising their children or whatever. And so for the people in my life who've kind of kept away, maybe they've heard someone like you say, oh, the race issue in the United States is horrendous, and maybe they saw clips online or something, or maybe like the news but they try to avoid it. How would you characterize, besides saying it's horrendous, could we maybe for the people alive now and for the people who will be watching this, hopefully when things are better in the future, right? What is the current situation? Where is the discourse at? What is the sort of spectrum of acceptable positions, or you know, what is it that has you saying it's so horrendous now? What, you know, and maybe this would be a chance to talk about some of the books on those bestsellers on the thumbnail for this conversation. But, you know, in the last couple of years, How to Be Anti-Racist and White Fragility and Nice Racism and these kinds of books, or Why I Stopped Talking About Race, or these kinds of books that you talk about in your book. Could you kind of, for those who haven't been doing those readings, or around people who have been, what's going on there? What is that position, or is that, could you kind of say that that's a unified position? Do they all assume the same things, or kind of, yeah? What is the current liberal left anti-racist position for the person who hasn't been keeping up? Yeah, it's a huge question.
Different position. There is different position in America. I said it's around this in the sense of it's part of a politics that is taken as a very personal point of view. And so for me, the way when I go a bit further from the issue, I'm seeing it is as part of a typical identity politics. I mean, it's not only race. The issue of a woman's right and trans rights is another hot topic. And those topics are hot from different background, from different groups of people. You have the progressive in America against what they call the right, and then you have hardly any what I call left in the sense of or Marxist. There's hardly any voices of those people, and you used to have the liberal progressives and so the Democrats and the Republicans, and I think both of them are wrong on that level. First of all, because I think that they're all racial determinists, and they're all into racial identity, and none of them are basically challenging the issue of racism. So at the end of the day, so they're all wrong for me. But they have different point of view. I mean, there is a lot of different theory.
So I would.
My problems is really that one of the main problems in America is that you know hardly anybody challenging racial thinking. So even if some people say, well, I want to be anti-racist, let's be anti-racist. They are doing the anti-racist based on racial thinking. So they're accepting racial thinking, and they're trying to argue that we need to fight racism by pushing some racial identity or racial consciousness or racial whatever. And yes. and both left and right, Democrats or Republicans, because I don't really think they are left and right. I'm sorry to say, but Democrats and Republicans, for me, there's hardly any differences. But both sides basically are all based on racial thinking. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book, is trying to argue that the problem is not only racism, because things have changed. Whether some people trying to claim it otherwise, black people, the position of black people or Native Americans or the minorities is different today than in the past. And things have improved in some aspects, and you cannot deny that. You cannot deny reality. But racial thinking is still supported both by racist and anti-racist. And by those anti-racist claim that they are fighting against racism, all their theory is based on racial thinking. The point of view is still based on dividing the world into groups of people and trying to understand. Basically, identity politics is that. It's basically you're saying that the world is divided into races, whether it's cultural races whether it's biological races or culture or ethnicity. So you divide the world into those groups, and you are arguing that each of those groups has different point of view, and then you have to fight. So we are all equal. Race equality has been there since the Second World War, apparently. So we're all equal, apparently, but we are in competition, and then we have to defend our resources or positions against other groups. Right. For me, how can I explain it? For me, my problems in the world today is the way that we see politics today, and this is based on identity politics. And racial identity is one example, or race issues, is one of the example of identity politics taking over any politics that you find today. And my definitions of identity politics is different from what you hear in the media at the moment, because people see identity politics only as a left phenomenon. They are seeing identity politics as race, sexual, the trans issue, or the religious for the Muslims, for example. But they see only identity politics from the left. For me, identity politics is when you take a social identity that you have in society. So you're a woman, or you're live in Germany, so you're German, or you're a professor. So you're taking a social identity and you're using this identity in politics as a way to fight the resources for your own identity group. So identity group as a professor, identity group as a black person, identity group as a white person, or even identity group as a working class. Everything is about your identity, your social identity, and you enter politics as a way of fighting for your identity group.
Right.
And race is one example, because it's when you look at when you understand politics only for identity, and identity is part of supposedly what defines us as an individual. Identity is, this is what I did also check on my PhD, is how we see each other as an individual. Identity has become the things that is more important. And identity is also very individualized today. So we cannot see each other, we cannot see ourselves without supposedly defining our identity. So identity is very personal. Politics is only identity politics. So politics becomes a very polarized, vicious competition between different identity groups. And race is one, because we only see ourselves only through race. Black, white, Asians, Native Americans, different. Or there is another identity politics, is national identity. Right. French, German, American, Libyan, Syrians. And so how to protect our national identity also, as a French person, I'm not supposed to have the same interest as the German person, than the German person. So this is how, this is, it's a bit different from what other people are trying to argue. What I'm saying is that the politics that we have today is not politics. It is not politics because it's only based on identity. It's politics. It's identity-based politics.
Right.
And that has been developed and happening for a long time. But unfortunately, anybody that used to be called themselves left has only taken identity politics. So politics based on identity. That's why you always have single issue politics. The points is that you have single issue campaign. The single issue campaign is based on identity politics, on fighting for the interests of a particular groups of people within the political realm. And this is what the left is doing. As fortunately for me, is what is in 21st century, is that the left has completely given up on anything except identity politics. And even working class politics has become only identity politics. Because the working class is seen as the poor, the one who has a certain interest, with certain way of life, certain values, certain institutions, and you're fighting for working class for basically as an identity groups. So working class politics has become only an identity politics, and that has nothing to do with for me as a Marxist, as an idea of transforming the world to a classless society, because at the end of the day, my political aim is freedom, the possibility of creating a world where humans will have the possibility to be free. Not that it was given freedom, but a world where the humans may be able to have freedom. And that can only happen in a classless society, as far as I'm concerned. And when you're looking at the working class politics today, it's to protect working class, to protect black, to protect women, to protect trans, to protect French, to protect, to protect professors, to protect students. This is what identity politics is to do today. I mean, this is why what I'm trying to do with the book is we need to be humanist, and we need to develop universalist politics that has been abandoned. For me, that's why left, right, it's. And I said it in once, and I know that some people are like, oh, because I said the identity politics is the politics of capitalism. Because when you look at identity politics, it started with the issue of race, for example, and it started, when people started the race, it wasn't the working class who did the race. It was the, scientists and the intellectual. Race was developed by scientists and intellectuals and the upper class,
Right.
In the 18th century, it wasn't the working class, it wasn't the white peasant who developed the issue of race. It was the intellectuals, intelligentsia of the Europeans and the Americans, professors and scientists and government. So the issue of race, one of the first identity politics in a world where you have inequality. They had to find a way of developing politics based on identity, and one of the identity was race. I'm saying too much at the same time.
No. There's I was my big fear going into this conversation was going to be, what if I can't get you talking? My fear is not that you might talk too much. I am not. No, that's fantastic, and you do bring up a lot. And there's a couple of threads here that I don't want to lose, which is probably why I'm sitting here going, blinking. But that's why I'm taking notes. So I will want to come back to the idea of rights and universalism, and do the devil's advocate thing where I say, okay, but I know what some people would say, blah blah blah. But before doing that, I want to acknowledge what you'd said about how class becomes a form of identity politics. This has been something I think that I only really started realizing maybe in the last year or so, and it's been a sort of, it's posing a problem for me, right? Because I've thought of myself, I'm a working class intellectual, right? And so this working class aspect of my identity, it is a kind of identity, and so saying class politics or no other kind of we have to have class, be centered, and then people say, oh well, intersectionality doesn't ignore class. Class is one of these vectors of oppression, which at first was satisfactory for me. I think that was probably satisfactory for me for a couple of years, until I realized none of the people who say that seem to get what I have a problem with concerning class in the first place, right? And that none of the kinds of solutions developed by anybody who purports to do a kind of intersectionality that adds class into the sort of matrix of identities, none of the solutions that they are advocating for seem to have any sort of future or any kind of what you'd say freedom, involved. There's not it wouldn't bring any tangible change for me if I saw more working class people on television. It would not. For me, it does not bring me hope to see a bartender now be a politician. I don't care. I don't care. When a journalist says, I think I've heard you say this. When a journalist says, "Well, I am working class," I don't fucking care if you're working class or not. Like, what are you talking about? And first of all, if you are now we've talked a little bit behind the scenes about this idea of the PMC, and maybe it's not the best term for this concept, but if what you are, or if the social position that you hold is, you're part of the media establishment, or part of the education establishment, or part of the political establishment, saying that you're working class, what you mean is that your parents were working class, right? So this idea that, oh, well, we just need the right people in positions of power. We just need more working class people in positions of power. This is the idea of representation. And for me, it's not satisfactory if it's a Bolshevik version of worker representation or if it's an American Democratic version of representation. Either way, this is representation, which is not the real thing, right? The real thing would be regular working people having a say over their lives, not somebody in a position somewhere saying, I represent your interests. I come from that. Right.
Exactly. I mean, actually, when somebody said there is some on Twitter, I used to follow working class academics, and I'm like, working class academic, because for me, I also have a working class background, but I don't think I don't, although I don't have a proper job, I don't think I could call myself working class as such. Not because of my education, because you can still be. I could have been a PhD and work in, work, but because of the jobs I'm doing at the moment, I'm reading and writing. So when you hear the working class academic, you're thinking, academic, okay, it's a job, yeah. So you, in one way, you are part of the working class, but right. The way that is presented, or working class journalists, or working class politicians. The way it becomes is like you have your identity as a working class, and then by having this proper identity, then you can talk to other people who are working class just because you have this proper identity. It's just so obvious. I have to say that working class as an identity is also been there for quite a long time, but it was more also on the define of when working class was defined in a sociological way, like the income level and that kind of things. It was also a little bit of an identity because you don't, I follow the definitions of working class in a more of a, what some people will say more of a Marxist. I don't like Marxist calling myself putting label, but more I see working class as a social relation. So whether or not you own the means of productions as a worker makes you don't. Sorry.
Right.
As workers don't own the means of production. So it's a working class. It's a social relations. It's a objective understanding of the that is used to be able to understand the world. So when people call themselves working class, you can use it as an objective understanding of where you are socially, or you can use it as another identity. And today it's only understood as an identity. So the level of income, as what you do, how you live. So if you're middle class, it's because you live in a certain way. But if you're working class, for example, if you're rough, you become a working class. So it becomes an identity. And but my problem is with the left, it's not only that it's an identity, but it's how it's also presented, how you fight identity. Like you said, the political aim of human emancipation or abolition of class has been forgotten. Most of the people, and class is important only, at least the working class is important only if your aim is to fight for a classless society, for the abolition of class. Otherwise, you've just been part of identity politics.
Right.
You see what I mean? Is that the reason why the working class was important is because of their social position in capitalism. So their interest was in basically linked with the interest of the social transformation of society. But if you're fighting for the working class just to protect them or to make them having a better life, you're just part of the identity politics of anybody else. You just basically you become a liberal, one of those people who call themselves left, but they are nothing to do with the freedom or social transformation. They're just basically they are fighting for the working class within capitalism. That's what they're doing. So it's a conservative status quo politics.
I think
you protect somebody within the society, so you don't even question capitalism anymore. You don't need to protect the working class. You don't need to question capitalism anymore because
right.
You're just protecting them.
Right, and I think it's probably worth digging a little bit more into what of Marx you take to be important to your project, because you said you don't like the label. I think you and I both share a sort of respect for the thinker who was Marx. And for me, it comes down to some of his fundamental concerns, questions, the problems he's focused on, and the critique of political economy more than, some political strategy pamphlet he wrote or something. And so for it's important to bring up this idea, though. You say you like that idea of like it's a relation, it's a social relation. You kind of brought up the means of production in relation to the means of production. You're saying it's definitely for you not income level, because income level is the sort of sociological definition of class. And I think that the idea gets a lot more complicated today in this version of capitalism we are now in, where the class divides are less painfully obvious for most people. They call it finance capitalism, they call it consumer capitalism, they call it neoliberal capitalism, whatever the phase you want to call it. One of the issues is that, we think of capitalists as CEOs, but those aren't even the capitalists. These are people who have been voted to represent the shareholders. These are just overpaid, glorified representatives of capitalist interests. The capitalists would be the shareholders, and then you have people who go, well, I own some stocks, and I have, I invest in my retirement and in a college fund for my children. So what? I'm a shareholder too. So for me, I think right now the way that I work with the distinction I use now, instead of saying it's a relation to the means of production, because a lot of people who might have some stocks, they don't own those means of production, obviously. And if they tried to do anything with those means of production, they'd probably just, get kicked off the board or whatever. The question is does money work for you when you're not working? Or do you work for money? Right? Like it's this classic the circuit of capital, M prime, that Marx uses in Capital. It's, does money exist for you as something that you just put into things that then it works for you? Or is the only thing you have your own labor power, and then you trade that for money that you then have to pay for rent and for food? And okay, if the latter, that I would say, yeah, that's how I would define working class, right? You trade your labor power for, and you basically are, it's paying rent and paying for food. And maybe once a year, every couple of years, you get to take the kids to Disneyland. It doesn't really, you might have a retirement account, but that's not the same thing as your money. The money works for you, right? In the form of paying the wages for people.
Yeah, but is it that important? Because in a way, it's a bit like each individual. Should I call myself a working class, or how much do I earn, or how much share? This is not the point of class, or at least for me, this is not the point of politics. Whether or not each individual who should define themselves as working class or middle class, or because at the end of the day, middle class is in a way a working class, but very often they are basically fight in a way that I understand middle class as very often their positions make them either supporting the interests of the working class or supporting the interests of the upper class, the capitalists. So when you're in the middle, that's what kind of middle, you're a manager of a company, whether you're going to support the other workers or you're going to fight against them and support the capitalist interest or your employer's interest. That's kind of a middle class position that you have. But this is the thing, is that why is it so important to define each individual as either working class, capitalist, or middle class? For me, class, the understanding of capitalism itself is more important than how do we define individual, because it's how do we understand the society and how do we want to what are the possibilities for us to change it, and who can do that? How do we do it politically? So the class will be important when it comes to political, and the result is important. But whether or not an individual is working class or not is not. The only reason why I talk about individuals working class or not is because, for me, it shows how class is part of identity politics today.
Right.
Because the politics have first of all, the aim has disappeared, and the only thing that is happening today is identity politics, single issues, or protecting an identity group. It's not whether or not an individual sees himself as a working class or not, because even if he was a working class, it doesn't. An individual is in a working class, it doesn't mean that he's going to fight for the interests of the working class anyway.
Right.
You know, it's not because you're a working class that you fight for the interests of the working class.
It's
not because you're black that you're fighting for the interests of black. So it's not you're having an identity doesn't means that you have the politics that is fighting for the interests of your identity group. For me, it's important. The class is important. A class is important as a way of understanding how our social system, our social order is organized today, and what are the possibilities to change that. Because today, I believe that humanity has the capacity to control their destiny more than they used to be in the past. We have more control over nature, we have more control over ourselves, and we have more control over our social world. That's what I think we are in the time where we can create something different because of the way the society is organized. And in the past, we were more determined by our natural world. Today, we are less determined by our natural world. In the past, we were more determined by our social world. Today, we are less determined by our social world. Within the society that we have, capitalist society, we have a possibility that we can go over the determination that is a barrier to our change. We can control our destinies more. We can understand it, and we can challenge it more than we used to be in the past. I mean, you wouldn't have the same change that, in the Greek society, you wouldn't have the same discussion. It's not possible to have had the same discussion. But today, for me, is that we arrive in a historical time where we have the possibility of creating something different. We have the possibility and the capacity to create something different. One of them is actually because of capitalism itself. Because of the issue of identity, for example, the issues of individualism, the issue of freedom, that give us the tools to create our own destiny.
So, yeah, I think that you may have just caught me sinking back into my old habits of working class identity politics. It becomes a sort of like gatekeeping of the concept, even though it really shouldn't matter. But it could matter, and I know Marxists in my life who would say it matters because they would think, well, we need to have working class people representing the working class interests. But this presupposes that there's like a unified working class interest and I've heard you say something that definitely contradicts that idea. There's not a unified working class interest if a lot of people's working class identity and interests are in existing as working class people and securing power for themselves as working class people, whether it be through a union or through the government or a nonprofit, because the position, and I think we both get this from Marx, should be that the point is not the empowerment and enshrinement of these working class identities and institutions, but or this idea of dual power that is, these working class dual power, setups. No, the point is the abolition of class. And
that's the aim.
How are you going to get that if the only people that you think should be centered and should be leading and should be representing a movement are people who are deeply invested in this idea that they are working class and that that's what they are and that's what they want, is to be working class and to maintain that. So
was there a question? Yeah, I mean, if you identity politics with the working class, sorry, I wasn't. if your identity is working class, and you know that when I was doing my research on the PhD, or actually on the book first, I didn't read one of fascinating essay for me is I want to mention it. It's the essay by G.M. Thomas, because I was going in that directions, because when I was writing the book, I was trying to see what's wrong with identity politics. And in the book, if I remember, I said that it's basically denied the objective differences between the working class and the capitalists. So the fact that you're workers becomes an identity more than the social position. And so if you use identity politics for working class or for anything else, you're basically forgetting about being anti-capitalist in the sense of challenging the society. And but after I wrote the book, I read this essay by G.M. Thomas. I think he's Hungarian guy. I don't remember those kind of details. But anyway, and he's going a little bit too far. But for me, he really kind of crystallized the direction I was going, because he's basically arguing that there was two different types of left. There was the Rousseauist left, and there was the Marxist left. And the Rousseauist left is basically what we've been doing for a long time when you look at it. And the Marxist left is what has been basically the radical, basically, has been disappearing, and that it is time now to now that we have rights, equal rights. I don't think human rights is such a good thing, but when you have rights, civil liberties, then and also certain positions as workers, then we need to go back to the Marxist left, in a sense of understanding what the aim of the Marxist left used to have, the radical transformation, the creating a society that is, so it's not changing people, it's creating a society that is different without the class. So if you fight for working class and for the interests of the working class, forgetting the political aim of creating society, you're basically keeping capitalism and you're improving the position more or less of the working class, but you never change it. And the Rousseauist is the left that is helping the working class to have better working conditions, helping the working class to have their own institutions and a way of life. But the Marxist left will be the one who are going to understand the interests of the working class in abolishing itself. Because unless they do that, there will still be working class. And we see that anyway, because today a lot of the workers are realizing nowadays that they have to use trade unions to be able to fight for better wages. So the working conditions hasn't been improved, so are going down, and they have to fight again. So you may as a workers fight for better working conditions, but it's not. You always have to fight it. The conflicts is always there. So until you change that, the society itself, you will always have this social conflict between the workers and the capitalists and other social conflict. I mean, the class conflict, basically, you will have the class conflict.
Yeah, this distinction. I'm glad this is, you brought up, I think naturally in the last half hour of this conversation, you've sort of naturally brought up things that I was hoping to get the opportunity to ask you about, and so that's perfect. We'd discussed before the interview having an intermission at the halfway point, and I think so in case you need to refresh yourself or get a drink of water or something like that, Well, in here it's actually getting surprisingly hot. It's hot, but it's cold outside, so I don't have a heater on. I don't understand how it's so hot now. But
but you're human beings and you're alive, huh? So you're creating heat.
I was gonna say it's probably all your hot takes you're dropping on the stream, but
No, it's you. I'm sorry to say, you're the one who's hitting the place.
I think so. I think you're right. I'm a human heater. But I had also told the chat, because there's been a few really good questions, and a couple people repeated their questions. I said we would be talking about some of these questions in the second half after the intermission, because during the intermission I'll have an opportunity to go back over the chat. And if you would like, I will also share with you here in the chat of this call. I will share with you a link to the live stream chat, so you can go over the stream chat so far if you would like to. Otherwise,
how do you do that? Because I mean, at the moment I'm only on. I mean, I don't see the chat.
Here, let me share it with you here.
I mean,
I just shared the. So I think that link will bring up just the chat.
So I have to go. Okay, so I have to shorten the. Okay.
But one sec. Is there anything you'd like to say before intermission?
What is it? What? You mean like? Why would I want to say something? I don't know.
Oh, just if you had any points for the order. Okay. So what I will do then is suggest that we both mute ourselves, and I'll play some music, and we'll be back in 5 minutes, everybody. So if you haven't got your questions submitted, go ahead and add those. It'll be between 5 and 10 minutes of intermission time. So yeah.
I'm going to mute myself.
Let's see. So I think it's
mute.
There you go.
Okay. How long do you say? 5-10 minutes?
How about 7? Be back in 7 minutes.
Okay. I'm leaving Germany, so I have to check 7 minutes.
Right. I heard the German minute is a lot longer. No, I'm just kidding.
See you later.
All right. Okay, bringing it back around here. Let's see. All right. How do I bring this back to full screen without the chat in there? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back too.
I was gonna say something to the general chat. If anybody in the chat has a question for Dr. Louis Dit-Sully, see, I said it right this time. And if you are on my WhatsApp, I can play your voice message over stream. That's one of the miracles of technology. And so my friend Love, that is Love's name, has asked a question that I'm going to play over WhatsApp just through the browser. That's possible. Yep.
But I also because I read some of the comments, and I think there is a misunderstanding of two things.
Perfect.
First, I do not deny I do not deny that there is discriminations against different groups, and I think we need to challenge that. And I also do not say we should not fight for the working class within capitalism. I'm talking about the political aim of the left, or the ultimate. I am the best way I've explained so far is short term and long term. So I will support, I will support groups of workers fighting for the better wages and better conditions of working conditions. Or I will support minorities fighting for rights. For example, in Europe, travelers are treated badly, so I will support them against discrimination. But my political aim, so the ultimate, the long-term political aim, is not only to support workers' better conditions or to support an adopted group. The long term is a classless or a radical social transformation. It's two different things. And if you forget this political aim, for example, if you forget this ultimate political aim, you're concentrating on only fighting and protecting and defending identity groups within capitalism. And that's what I disagree with what is called the left today. It's because they are forgetting the political aim, that the radical political aim, and concentrating on the status quo, on challenging and fighting for better conditions within capitalism.
That's hopefully a good enough clarification for, I think there were a few people who were wondering about that. And for me, it seems like it's very hard to organize people who really are only focused on the short term, especially when the short term and almost every way that has been laid out for us to be able to fight in the short term is so carefully developed to incorporate movement energy back into the current framework of power, right? Almost anything we see gets swept right back up into the Democratic Party, which I did an interview with Gerald Smith on my channel, and he said that's where, he said, yeah, the Democratic Party, where movements go to die, right? And so how to get out of that trap, I guess, is one of the bigger questions and problems for us all.
Of the trap of what?
Of any kind of movement energy being reincorporated back into the Democratic Party.
I'm sorry to say, but anybody who's still into Democratic, I'm going to be rude there. Anybody who thinks themselves left and they are supporting Democratic Party or the Labour Party or any of those, in France will be like Michelin, if they think themselves as left and they still think that they have to be the Democratic Party or the Labour Party in the UK, I'm sorry, but no. It's seriously, no.
So then,
there is...
how would you, so you say we can fight against, say, discrimination in the short term, but we have this long-term plan and vision, and we put most of our energy towards, the abolition of say, class or something like this. Then what is then short term? What I was saying is that short term almost always just means, if not working within the Democratic Party or whatever, the Labour Party, whatever the existing parliamentary system is, maybe it means like what? Working for a nonprofit? What does it mean to you to do both? If it's not, this politics as usual Democratic Party stuff, what would it mean? This short term, what would that mean to you?
Don't you think it's I have to say that I was reading some of those comments. Now you're disturbing me with this comment there. Don't you think it's a bit strange that somebody's talking about dog pushing universal vision? Oh yeah, I love dog push. Anyway, don't you think it's a bit strange that it's not just this question comes up also in when I discuss politics with some of the left in the UK. They're basically saying, well, if you don't do it within the Democratic Party, or if you don't do it within the Labour Party, what else can you do? It's as if like we have to be part of this old political party and to be able to to change the world. It's like you only see politics through parties and not only parties, but through the established parties. And for me, politics is not that. It's the same as democracy. Democracy is not about voting every few years and put a paper, a cross on the paper, whatever people do in voting. This is not democracy. It is an aspirations or politics or I wouldn't call it sentiment because it becomes too emotional. But it's an attitude of politics. And it's the same for me. Politics it's not being part of a party and then you're going to hope that you're going to change the party. It's having political aim and fighting for it. So for me, I'm not against involving. The reason why I'm going to answer the same question as that, a classless society. The reason why we're talking about a classless society is based on the understanding of how society is organized. So capitalism is a different classes, yes, but societies in the past were also with different classes. So we have social conflicts throughout human history, and social conflicts and class conflicts between different groups of peoples. And today in a capitalist society, you have the people who own the means of production, because I also understand society in a way that Marx will understand it. Through the productions and reproduction of society, and to produce and reproduce ourselves is through the productions of society. It's a bit ridiculous to say that. Through our productive activity, humanity cannot sit on their ass and live. We have to produce in interaction with nature and interaction within our social world. Yes. So we produce and reproduce society. As if you understand society that way, then you understand how this productive activity is organized. In capitalist society, our productive work, means of productions, is owned by a class, and workers working, the one who producing, the producers, do not own the means of productions of the society that they are producing. So the workers producing society, but they do not own the means of productions of this society. The classless society, it means that the reason I also agree with Marx on that level is that I think that we are in a stage where it is possible to go away from a class society. Historically, we had class. We had you had the aristocrats, you had the servants, the peasants. So you had class producing and the class who are taking over what is produced. But I think we are arriving in a stage in society with the capitalist society where it is possible to produce a classless society, i.e. to have no workers, i.e. that the means of production is not owned by a specific groups of people, by a minority of people. Actually, I've forgotten what you were asking me to do. But yes, for the short term is to build. So for me, the reason why I'm not against, for example, challenging anti-racism, not because I think racism is the only issue, is that there is some issue that are useful in building a politics that help us to change society. Race is an issue. Working class conditions and working class interests is not other issues that you can use those issues as a way of building a movement that makes people want to change society. Because I'm not a dictator and I'm not into imposing I'm not into let's vote and then we impose society. I'm saying that people have the possibility of understanding what is wrong in society and how to change it through political actions. If you just, for me, race was a good example, because for me race is just show what is the real divisions between people and what are why they are there, and also how can we go over them, how can we build a movement that is universalist. And race is one of the issues that you have to challenge to be able to build a universalist movement. Workers conditions is another issue that is very useful, because you show that the interests of some workers, some people would say the interests of, for example, a chambermaid can go against the interests of a waitress. So you have to show that it's not. So worker solidarities, or the interests of the native workers should against the interests of immigrant workers. Immigration, for example, for me is also a very important issue to use and to challenge, because you're basically showing, you want to show that the problems is not immigrants versus native, it's the way it is organized, the way that the society is organized, that creates divisions, or that divisions are reinforced.
Yes, or as Zizek says in his book on refugees, that it's the, it's not, oh, should we let more immigrants in or should we let fewer immigrants in? The real question is, how do we change the system that is making it so that people, or I said immigrants, but I mean immigrants or refugees. He says, how do we change the conditions that make it so that people are fleeing their countries? How do we make it so that we change the conditions so that there aren't opportunities in other countries, right? And usually these kinds of movements are a direct result of, in our case, U.S. foreign policy. The current the immigration crisis in the United States, where so many people flee here, not just because governments have been destabilized by neoliberalism, but also you have migrant workers coming who their families used to own farms. And because of NAFTA, their farms were bankrupted, right? There was specific policies that made it so that it was that way. And then people want to turn this into borders or no borders, immigrants or no immigrants. Well, that's kind of a side issue. The point is that we made it so that there's not opportunities there, and now people have to come here to be exploited by, these farmers in the United States. But what I wanted to do really quick is to play Love's question. Yeah. Love is in the chat. I think it's Love I Am or something like that. But I've got his face up on the screen here. I don't think you'll be able to see this, Christine. You'll hear his question. I'll just play it. And let me know if you are able to hear this okay. Here we go.
Dr. Christine, I really enjoy your willingness to embrace change in every present moment. Would you agree that every government that would limit its people with rules and force is in direct opposition to any view that you might have for universal or real freedom that is supported in society? And thus, to achieve real or universal freedom, we need communities that are more focused on prescription and values and reinforcing those, as opposed to restriction and limitations, or fear-based limitations.
Am I talking?
Yeah, he also sent a follow-up question. I don't know if it's a direct follow-up to that first question that clarifies the first question, or if it's an additional question. I asked, and I'm still waiting for a response on that. But how about we just play it, because I think he's probably going to recapitulate the question. Here we go.
Dr. Christine, you call yourself a black woman, and you've pointed out how identity politics are limiting, and you've also pointed out how race is limiting. Would you say that the pros outweigh the cons for identifying as black, considering that black in language has constantly carried metaphors such as evil, scary, hidden, beautiful, ugly, and many other things that may be carried when you speak about yourself in groups? Do you find that that is more limiting than beneficial to say that you are this thing that has historically demonized our people?
Woo.
Right. What was the first question again? On the level of black woman, in one way you're right in the sense of both. These things about identity is problematic because in the current society that I am today, I am known as a black woman, a woman, biological sex, gender, woman, and black as part of a certain racial group. I'm against this idea that somehow, because I know that I can't remember the name of some of those intellectuals who are arguing that they refuse to be called black, and as a way of challenging racism. I'm not into this kind of politics because I think it's too much on the level of change within your own mind. For me, it's not the problem. The problem is not identity. The problem is identity politics. So, in the sense of doing politics as a black woman would be for me a problem. So, I'm a black woman. People call me a black woman. It's not an issue for me. It's if I was doing politics as a black woman. So, as a black woman, I think racism, or as a black woman, I'm fighting for black people. That is my problem today, and because actually that is limiting. Because actually, even talk in the book, I always been anti-identity politics, and I realized that a lot of people who are arguing against identity politics are also doing identity politics. And in the book, I use the argument, the example of Serena Williams when she got angry, and there was a cartoon which I found quite racist because it's using the stereotype of the angry black woman. This is an old stereotype of the very racist time. And so when I argue against this cartoon, suddenly I became a black woman with people that I used to do politics with, and other or friends who know my politics for a long time. And I just realized that suddenly I became part of a group, and somehow my identity in part of these groups was supposedly to determining my political point of view. So I was against the cartoon, and I saw it as racist because I was a black woman, and I was upset being seen as an angry black woman, which I think is identity politics. So I don't have any problems calling myself a black woman in the sense of how people see me. It's an identity that is this in society today. But I have a problems with my social identity is used in politics in the sense of arguing for determining my point of view, my positions, my political positions, and how I should behave in society. That is the problems. And also me using it as a black woman, I know more about racism. That kind of things. I also against that. I don't know if you understand. I don't know if I answer the problem. It's not identity itself, because identity, I cannot be against identity because this is how we see each other today. Identity has become, because we live in a capitalist society which is very individualized, identity has become the way that people understand themselves as individual. But I am against the issue of social identity or identity used in politics to fight against politics, because it is conservative politics. So you can use it to fight for working class or for black, but this is not a politics that will change the world, basically. It's not a politics that will improve it. Do you understand what I mean? Can he talk or?
Oh, he could send a follow-up voice message on WhatsApp if that's what you're asking him to do. He's not live on the call.
Okay.
Yeah, I like WhatsApp for its voice messaging option. As you know, I like voice messaging, but treating it like a walkie-talkie.
And what was the first question? There is a.
I feel like the first question, he was very deliberate in how he proposed the question, but my experience with Love is that a lot of times, because he talks in such a precise and deliberate way, it's usually confusing, and then I need to listen to it again, because when I first met him, I was like, I've never met a person who talks like this before. But it's because he kind of refuses a lot of the categories and even jargon of average everyday language. He's very, very careful about how he communicates, and just to piggyback off of this the second question that you just responded to, though, he does not identify as black. He would probably agree with you that people will identify him as black, but the first time that came up in a conversation was after I had said something along the lines of like, well, I mean, you're black, because he was being harassed by some police, and he was saying he did not understand why they were coming at him in this threatened, scared way. And I was like, well, you're a tall black man who's wearing camouflage pants and tactical gear. And then he said, I'm what? And I was just like, black? And he's like, and he goes, he basically says that he does not identify as black. And I was like, all right, well, fair enough. So, if he wants to do a follow-up to that second question, then, he could do that. But I guess I will play the first question again, and I will put it on one.
I remember he wanted to talk about restrictions, and I wanted to see if it's I think he was arguing that if governments makes restrictions on people, I imagine. So I imagine what he's talking about is laws and policies that it's a bit like a kind of I'm not going to label like. Okay, I'm not going to label it, but governments making laws and policies that restrict people's way of life or decisions, whether or not, I think what he was asking is whether or not, naturally, I can't remember. But he was talking about restriction.
I think he's basically saying, are you for force, government force against people? That's what that's, correct us if we're wrong here, Love, but that's what my basic takeaway is, are you for force against people, government force?
Wow. You will say no, but then again, I think it's not specific enough, because I'm not a pacifist, so using force is not a problem for me, and I'm not. Actually, I cannot be a pacifist, because if I want to change the world, there will be some blood growing at some point, because there is no way that the people who have the power and who have the power, basically, will allow people with no power to take over. So there will always be some, it's not going to be happening pacifically and quietly or whatever. But the government, for me, the government and the state, it's working. We are in a society where some people have the power, the political power and the economic power over others. So the state and the government work for capital and work for the interests of the capitalist. So when you look at the laws and policies, they are very often organized in a way that to keep the way the world is organized. I mean, the way the society is organized. An example, I think one of the books I found interesting, although I disagree, is I can't remember. What's the name of her book? Oh, I always had it in my mind, and today I don't have it. But she was something like. I'm going to share. No, anyway, but she was showing how laws are specifically made against the working class. She's concentrating on the black, and I think she's making mistakes of not realizing that a lot of the laws, especially in America, but actually not only especially in America, but in America there is a lot of the laws against working class. But she's always looking at the black working class, that's the mistakes. When in fact the laws are against the working class. For example, the laws for staying in your car. If you're homeless and you stay in your car in some towns, you're being fined. The justice system is, if you're a criminal, you steal an apple, you may be, you're kind of seen as not an apple, but you steal I don't know. A TV, you're a criminal. But if you are a fraud and you are spending a lot of money, millions of money, you're stealing a lot of millions, you're not seen the same way as if you're stealing a TV. So a lot of the laws and policies are for basically challenging the interests of ordinary people. They are keeping the way that the status quo, basically. And so in one way, for me, the state and the government, because we are within a capitalist society, they are not your friends. They're as workers, as ordinary people, they're not there for your things. And anything they do will be to force you to do something. I mean, there is a lot of policies basically telling us how to live, not only with work, but also how to live within our own family. And within our community, there is more and more of those authoritarian laws that tell people what to think and how to behave, not only with employers, but also with their kids, their spouse, their friends. So those, it's already happening. I mean,
the question that he was asking. About force, I think you basically answered it by saying that you're not against force. Obviously, the systems that maintain capital today they use force and domination to maintain that status quo. The question of how to get out of that without perpetuating domination. It's an important and it's a difficult question. The Swolitary just joined the chat. What's up, Swole? Good to see you. He said, you can't love your way to a better society. He's a Trotskyist, so that's a very Trotskyist position, I think.
I agree.
You cannot love your way out.
I'm not into love and hippie stuff.
Yeah.
Right,
like this, I think there's a kind of politics, or you'd call it probably anti-politics today, that is not just pacifist, but is also sort of, it comes from like that Course in Miracles book, where the idea is, choose love, not fear. That's basically this, it's all about your mindset. We can manifest the world we want. Yeah. But I think...
I'm sorry, but that's not me.
And I don't know how much that would be Love's position, or if that's fair. You can always... ask or expand on that in the chat. But
you think that love is about the love guy? Love I am, I think.
Yes.
He's asking whether or not we can love each other or something.
Well, I will let him expand on the question. I do. Obviously, we're not against love. The thing that he had actually said before the break, though, before he sent me voice messages, was that because somebody else in the chat was saying, "Oh, I think that Christine's position is basically revolution or bust. That we absolutely have to be pushing for revolution." And then so Love I Am responded by saying that in every conversation where the topic of revolution comes up, we have to clarify what it is that we are talking about, because that word is so, well, without butcher, I think what he's saying is like people use that word in a lot of different ways. So what do we mean by revolution? I think is a good expansion on the question. And
you asking me?
Yes. Yeah, well, because you had used the word, I think you'd used the word.
No, I did not. I think it's too early. I mean, and first of all, I haven't thought about it recently. I'm talking about radical social transformation. I'm not sure whether or not a revolution would be the step for it or not. I just know that it's not going to happen and we all love each other and then things will change. Because for me, the radical social transformation, the important word is the social. So, but to be able to have a social transformation, it means that, at least today, it means that you will have social conflicts with people taking sides and then fighting to have a social transformation, and people fighting to keep the status quo. So it cannot be done with love, because some people will think politically that their interest is to keep the status quo, and some people will think that their social interest and political interest is to have a social transformation. And at the moment, I'm in the process of, for the last few years, I'm in the process of reconsidering quite a lot of my point of view. I told you outside the things that I used to be with other people, and I changed. They went that direction, in one direction, and I went to another direction. So at the moment, there is nothing for me that is completely set in stone. But for me, what I think is important that is being not done at the moment is, and that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. I'm trying to reread Capital, by the way.
Hey, I think, me too.
Yeah. But because the reason is because I think one of the things missing today, it's a lot of people call themselves anti-capitalist, but one of the things missing today is the real criticism of the society. So we have criticism of social conflicts, we have criticism of political or identity politics, for example, like I do, I'm criticizing identity politics, but the criticism of the society itself, the criticism and the standing of our material conditions is not being done today. And until we do, all we're going to have is kind of sentimental left-wing things that you have today. So, I want to have trans people to be better, and I want to have black people to be better. And I call it sentimental or liberal left politics.
Right.
I'm not against sentiments, and I'm not against love, but it's not radical. It's not going to... It's targeting the wrong things, because in one way, it's basically you're putting the problems onto individuals and groups of individuals. Instead of kind of trying to understand the root of the problem, which is for me is a social, material and social, economic, basically.
Right.
I know that some people will call them say that if you talk about economy, then you become what they call it
class reductionist.
That's what they are trying to argue against Adolf Fried, class reductionist. I think that you're not class. You're only class reductionist if you only talk about politics in the sense of working class. But if you have an understanding of society in a material understanding of society, you will have, because economy is, it's not economy in the sense of the social, the bourgeois understanding of economy. Economy is social. Economy is it's the way that the structure of society is organized in a way that makes us live today and produce and reproduce society today. So economy is social.
Right.
That's why sometimes for me I always have a problem, because when I said a social transformation or social condition, people see society as me and you and together. So they see social as interpersonal relationship. And very often I'm arguing that people see society as if we are individual in a vacuum and we are interacting with each other. For me, social can only be understood if you understand the structure of how we are organized in society to produce the future. Because just simply, we are one generation, next generation, next generation. How this generation goes through each other. How do we produce the society? So there is a certain structure in society that has to be understood to see that we can change that. In the past, people were living in a certain way. Today, we live in one way. Is it possible to make it better? And I think that we have the morality today that allows us, the morality and the intellectual capacity and the material conditions to be able to move forward. Capitalism is only historically specific.
Right.
Yes? It's not the end of humanity. It's just a step. For me, it's a step. It's not human society. It's a historically specific society that we have today. So how do we? So for me, that's what the left is missing, is the understanding what are the structures and the conditions, material conditions, that allow us to be able to challenge that. And of course, you also have, on top of that, you have the social conflict that is that we have to challenge. I mean, like I said, there is different groups going to be a social conflict doesn't stop. So different groups challenging each other, and then we have to be involved in the social conflicts to be able to challenge that, to be able to change society. Do I make? I think I'm not very clear, but
well, in a sort of sense, you're working through these ideas, and one of the things that you said is that you're reconsidering a lot of your positions, your assumptions. This is you, especially after you write your first book. You start to be like, wait, I said that. Now I got to really think about that, especially. So I guess I got a couple of questions that will take us away from the chat. There's a few things I plan on coming back to. I hope you will not be distracted by the chat. It's really easy to be distracted by
yes, true.
every little thing that they'll say. We'll come back to some of the things in the chat. Folks, I hope that you will also realize that if your questions are not answered here, to have your questions actually live and perhaps get responded to best, a lot of the times you need to come back and comment on the video later. Not on the live chat, but in the actual comment section, so that, for instance, I could see Carl's question being one that has to be thought about more, perhaps. But I've got questions that I've developed from reading this book with my partner, Anne, and so I definitely want to be able to get to a couple of those before we close out. And then if there's a couple that are kind of that we've seen that we're still thinking about, we might get a chance to address them. But I think one of the big questions for you now that you've written this book and you're working on at least another book, if not more than another. You say at the end of this book, you say that really what you hope is that you've renewed and sort of launched an ongoing discussion that hopefully people will engage in this discussion, that it won't just end there. And one of the things that I appreciate about your critically nuanced approach to all of these things is that you don't just come into the discussion with your set of, you've got it all figured out, and now you're just trying to convince everybody you've got it all figured out. It's a lot, instead you go, well, both sides are wrong. Here's some reasons why both sides are wrong. The solutions being offered right now are insufficient because the solutions we would need would have to do X, Y, and Z things. So, and you're clearly thinking, okay, so what would that be then? What would that look like? And you're not coming along as a dictator saying, I have it now. Here's the solutions. But one of my questions for you as an author and as a thinker, or as an academic as well, you focused on science for a long time. You didn't want to really be a part of the race discourse. but that became impossible to avoid, especially once you lived in the United States, and then you were shocked by the sort of level of this discourse. And so this is your first foray. I don't even know how to say that word. Foray into the conversation of race and politics. So, what are some of those things that have changed for you because you've been researching? What are some of the problems that you are thinking through? It doesn't have to be, oh, you believe this and now you believe something different, but it could be more like, here's a problem, it's a hard problem, you're trying to think through it, or just maybe a way that your research is changing you. It's a very loaded question, so I could rephrase it if you want me to.
No, it's a big question. You basically you're asking what kind of ideas I've moved on from the book, basically.
Yeah, kind of where's this going? Yeah, for you.
I have to say that if I talk about the book, I will say that in the book I was still very much of a liberal.
Oh, really?
Yes. I moved on from some of the liberal position that I have. I'm going to compare myself to Marx, started a liberal, but I'm ashamed. The book is not as radical that, as I am now. Since the book, anyway, I did more research on identity politics because when I talk about identity politics, most of the, like I said before, most of the people will only look at left identity politics, and I try to understand why is it. First of all, I disagree with that, but also why is it that identity politics has become such basically. Is there a possibility to have politics outside identity politics? That's what one of the questions was there, and I think it's true. And so for me, it was like also understanding what is politics. Why is it so important for humanity to have politics? Why is it that some people are arguing that we are in an hyper-political century? There is too much politics today. I disagree. And I wanted to understand actually what is seen as politics, what's wrong with that. So at the moment I'm doing a lot of thinking around, basically I came to the idea that identity politics is the politics of the status quo and it's politics of the capitalist society. And the reason why I'm arguing that is, and so because some people will say, well, if you're saying that, then when people were doing politics in aristocracy or in the Greek society, they were also doing through their identity. But I think that the issue of identity was not the issue that it used to be in the past until it became so basically the importance of identity comes from the fact that we don't have a society where you are born into your identity. So when you were in a feudal society, for example, you are born a peasant and you die a peasant. You are born an aristocrat and you die an aristocrat. We are in a modern world where you can be born as a working class and die as the Queen of England, basically, in one way. And actually, that's what happened. Maybe with Kate, for example, she could become she could start from being a commoner, what I say, and then finish with being the queen. Who knows, the queens of England. So the identity that we have not as fixed, but because we are also in a very individualized world, the identity becomes such an important issue. So for me, I'm trying to understand why is it that identity politics has become such important, and what's the barrier to social transformation? What does it create? I don't know. I'm not very clear. I'm trying to, in one way, if you look at it, I'm trying to revive politics through challenging identity politics. and through challenging the idea that that we are living in a hyper-political world. Because for me, what is called politics today, it's not. I agree with, for example, Anna Arendt, when she argued that politics cannot be politics without the issue of freedom. And I think it's true. Not in freedom in the sense of as if freedom was the same thing, because for me, when I look at notions are always socially and historically specific, in the sense of the notion of freedom in the past is not the same as it is today. It cannot be the same. Human beings in the past are not the same as human beings today. We make ourselves, so we change. But the issue of making a world human, more human, I think it's an important part of politics. And if you have a politics today where it's talking about how many sausages you have in a lunchbox of a kid, you don't talk freedom. You talk necessities, everyday life. And do you see what I'm trying to saying is that I'm trying to understand and to I'm trying to, sorry, my husband is just showing me the food, and I'm talking about basically food, but I'm trying to understand the ideas and the barriers for us to change. The book is about hope, and I'm following that. I have the hope, but hope is not enough. What are the intellectual and social barriers to hope, to change?
Mm-hmm.
And the understanding of politics and anti-politics is one of the problems.
No,
I'm an optimist, but
you asked, if you're making sense, and you said that you don't think you are, or at one point. I think you're doing fine. I think what people are hopefully going to take away from your answer to this last question is that you've really got your work cut out for you, that it's not easy. And I think, personally, anybody who thinks that the answers are easy is obviously a lot deeper in ideology than they might realize, right? In the sense of you've bought into or sort of subscribed to a set of scripts, pre-programmed answers to questions. That's not the same thing as genuinely thinking through, or as Hegel says, struggling with the concept, right? So I really look forward to what you're doing, to seeing where it goes, and to thinking through these barriers to human freedom, specifically to the kinds of freedom that you're talking about, people's ability to develop their capacities and our collective potential, which is currently obviously completely overdetermined and monopolized in a lot of ways by these apparatuses of capture, institutions, pre-scripted, pre-programmed modes that get called politics that are arguably not politics, that ultimately just give us a sense of representation when that's a delusional sense because we're not represented by these systems, right? So,
I mean, somebody said the end of humanity is Star Trek. Yeah, I love sci-fi too. So for me, I'm thinking that a lot of people. You were also telling me about my book, the title of my book. I'm going to remind you of that. You said that the title of my book was, what was the word you said? Basically,
corny.
Corny. Voila. I forget. Corny. What does it mean by corny? I even went to check the definitions. Like,
oh no!
Dare call the title of my book corny. But in fact, you're right. But
oh no! I just looked up the definition. It's honestly, it sounds way worse when you read the definition, which is trite, banal or banal, however you say that word, or mawkishly sentimental. Aw, I'm sorry.
Oh my God! How dare! No, seriously. No, the title was on purpose. I mean, I explained to you why I chose the title, but it's for me. It's like maybe I'm also I'm a sci-fi person, maybe left sci-fi, but this idea that it is possible to when you look at the the humanity in the beginning and at the end. For me, I'm looking at. For me, I love human. I mean, I think that we have done so much, and there is still a possibility, and we keep remaking ourselves and changing. Yes, there is some good things and bad things, but the just the possibility for us, the possibility that we have to make ourselves is, for me, is such a wonderful thing. So I'm thinking, why is it that we cannot imagine the world as human, not as French, German, black, white, female, but as human? So Star Trek, humanity going outside in the stars and meeting other aliens. I mean, you can have all the imagination, but what is it? This is how I look at politics. As a human politics. It is possible to have human politics and universal politics, and I try to see what's the barrier to that. Maybe I'm too much into sci-fi. Who knows? But
no, I think it's and after you explain the title, your choice, your thinking, yeah. I thought that's fair. Yeah, I hope that this book will be one that a person who is getting into politics or who got swept up into politics in the last few years, especially a person who has been reading a lot of the anti-racist literature, the stuff that's very popular, the stuff that's being pushed at them in the bestsellers lists, a person who's trying to do their best. I hope that they will read this, right, as a sort of corrective measure. Because, and earlier when I asked, how would you characterize the current moment, I think that you thought, well, there's a lot of positions, they're not all the same. I think allow me to characterize the current discourse, and then you can correct me if I'm, because I am going to oversimplify the Kimber Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, who's that guy who said that DiAngelo is like the you said that he says that she's the new sheriff in town?
Yeah. Michael Dyson.
Yeah, Michael Eric Dyson. Yeah, as well as Kimberly Crenshaw, as opposed to the sort of Glenn Lorry, John McWhorter, FAIR kind of push to counter that whole thing. I would just characterize it as this. It really basically boils down to, on the one side, you're racist if you do not become an anti-racist activist. And that's Kendi. It's also DiAngelo. And it's the idea that, and what they mean by anti-racist is they mean that you need to cultivate self-aware racial consciousness in every dynamic that you have with other people. And if you're not doing that, then you're racist, because you are participating in and benefiting from or somehow playing into systemic racism, which they define as statistical negative outcomes for groups, specifically racialized groups. So, but I think the key point here is the thing about racialized consciousness, as opposed to, and the thing that they are often fighting against is what they call colorblind racism, which you kind of alluded to earlier. You said you're not a colorblind racist, or you're not for being colorblind, which is the idea, I don't see race, right? And I don't think even the Glenn Lorries of the world are so simplistic that they would say, I don't see these things. But I guess their position is basically, this is identity politics is bad. It's being used by the left to turn away from the most important issues. We need to just combat critical race theory, and that, the point is the content of a person's character, not their identity. And I think that for a person who's seen that as being the two sides, would say, well, then how is Dr. Louis Dit-Sully not just that other side of the, how are you different than the conservative response to the you must cultivate racial consciousness in a self-aware way in every one of the situations that you have with other people?
You know that I started to agree a little bit with Glenn Lowry. I discovered him on Facebook from other people, and but like you said, they are conservative, but when you hear Glenn Lowry, for example, discussing, and John Walton and others, they're talking about my people. And I think for me, when you talk about my people, you are also based on the same point of view as others. You basically, that's what I said, is they are all into racial thinking. They just have different position. And I disagree with both positions. I disagree with the idea that of Candy saying that basically it's putting all the white people as responsible. So individuals responsible for the situation, and they all have to do something about it, otherwise they are racist. So you have to act, otherwise you're racist. So you're putting the blame as on individuals. And Glenn Lowry and others, the conservative, is not the only one. There is also this young guy, I can't remember all. I have problems with names, but there is quite a few of them conservative. If you are black conservative, you are very popular with the anti-woke, what you call anti-woke crowd. So in the beginning, I had become popular with some of the anti-woke crowd because I was challenging black identity. But when I started to challenge other identity, I suddenly really realized I was a little bit too left for the anti-woke crowd. And the black conservatives yes, this is how I started. It's because I challenged not a black identity. Black identity is good when you're other people. When you're black, challenging black identity, you can be part of the anti-woke crowd, but if you challenge white identity or any identity, national identity, then you become too much of a left wing for the conservative. So anyway, but the black conservative are also wrong, because what they are saying is that the culture, I mean, they're arguing that, the blacks are, if there was, they're killing each other, and if they change their culture, if they have more families and less men making babies. So what they're basically saying is that they also put the blame on the groups of people for the social problems. So both of groups are putting the blames on individuals and on individual groups for the social issues.
Right.
One is saying the white people are responsible and that they have to do something about the world, about racism. And the other one is saying, well, if the blacks have better culture, or work harder, they will, this is wrong.
Right.
Both of them.
Right.
I'm not a conservative because, like I said, the conservative don't see society, and I'm not a progressive because they are using racial thinking to promote basically racist ideas in one way. Because if you're saying that just because you're white you're racist, then this is a racist idea. You're doing the same as what other people used to do. But one of the things I found in Candy is that I just recently understood him. He had written an article, and he was asking for institutions and groups of people like him to be involved in making institutions and decide if a law or policies would be racist or not. So basically, he was asking for his own power, yeah?
Right.
And to change the policies and the laws. And this is, of course, a lot of conservatives were reacting to it, because it was like saying, well, hold on a minute. So basically, because you're black, you're going to decide whether or not a law or policies is right or wrong. And that's based on his point of view. It's not because he wants to necessarily is thinking that all whites have to be enemies, because his argument is a little bit more sophisticated than what's the name of the woman that you were mentioning?
D'Angelo.
Yeah, this woman is just, he's a bit more sophisticated than her, because he's arguing that it's the policies and the laws that are creating the issue, and that's why he, as a black person and of the other people, has to be involved in changing the policies and the laws to fight against racism. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than those people who are arguing that just, because you're white, you're racist. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
One of the conservative arguments is always they're saying that all those progressives are racist because they think all the whites are racist. But this is not exactly true.
Right.
But they're still wrong.
Right.
Because they're still putting the problems of the social issue onto an identity group on that level. So
Right.
the understanding of it, and they don't challenge the issue of race. None of them challenge the issue of race.
Right.
The only reason the type of people who challenge the issue of race are the one who are doing psychologically, who are arguing let's forget about race, and that's a psychological education way of thinking, which also for me is not right.
Right. Right. And I want to talk about psychology just a little bit, but have you read Shelby Steele's White Guilt?
Yeah.
Yep.
No,
No?
I read his yeah. I mean, the title of his book is White Guilt.
Yeah.
I read him. As was not who wrote the one on diversity? Ah, yes, I think it's White Guilt. Yeah, I read him, and I read also Walter Ben Michaels. Both of them I like.
Yes, and I really like Walter Ben Michaels. From what I've been able to tell so far, somebody brought that up in the comments, was saying that he's really good for talking about this focus on privilege within, ultimately how it becomes a sort of this sort of legitimation narrative for meritocracy. But that whole thing's very interesting too. But Shelby Steele, I don't know what his politics are. I don't know. All I can, I haven't done any research into him as an individual. I think his book was just on a list of books about the topic, and I looked into it. But I think he's actually a good example of the limitations of the standard response to the woke identity politics approach, because I think that he's onto something when he says that white guilt and black power kind of came about as the new mode at the same time after civil rights, as like this idea that, interpersonally a black person can get empowerment and a sort of interpersonal reparations by a white person putting themselves down, and that black uplift comes from a white person putting theirself down. And I'm like, yeah, I can definitely see how that's a big part of the mode today. But then, he part of his narrative, because he keeps talking about these sort of transformative experiences when he was involved in Black Power, when he first became, when I think he talks about going to see this comedian, some famous comedian who was giving a talk on and it was a very angry talk about how basically, if you believe in personal responsibility in this system, then you're actually part of the problem. And he's like, this guy's talking about my dad. My dad, took, being responsible, hardworking black man very seriously. But for him, he said it was ecstatic. He was relieved by this idea that white people do not have the moral high ground from which to talk about responsibility, and that more importantly, any kind of responsibility in the system is, throw it out. It's garbage. And so he felt relieved. He felt empowered by that. And he says later in life, he kind of realized he had he had signed up for a bad bill of goods. But his emphasis becomes actually responsibility is the solution. Actually, black people do need to take responsibility. And so here you have it. It's like halfway there. But then he still falls into what you're saying. He still falls into saying that well, it really boils down to it. He actually kind of says this: blacks are responsibility for their own uplift, right? And so now he's talking about my people this, my people that again, and we just need to be more responsible, which kind of brings it right back into this whole conservative narrative about how we're responsible for poverty now, right? So. Mm-hmm. That's often, like, it seems like their critique gets halfway there. I guess my big question, you mentioned Dr. Adolph Reed earlier, though. His position is obviously not, he doesn't bring it back to responsibility and such. He has a little bit more, I think, of a Marxist basis. When
Who? Sorry, I didn't hear the name.
Dr. Adolf Fried Jr.
I guess okay. Because the sounds is not as good. Okay, carry on.
But did you? So you had mentioned him earlier when you had said something about class reductionism. Were you saying that he is a class reductionist, or were you saying that you read his article on how class reductionism is a myth, or what was the context you were bringing up, Dr. Adolf Fried Jr.?
It's because people accuse him. This is one of the accusations against Adolf Fried.
Oh, okay.
That he is a class reductionist because he's arguing. He's arguing class quite a lot. So he's basically, for example, he's looking at university students and showing that basically it's a class thing. The black students going to universities are very much into upper class, middle class, upper class. So he's using the issue of class quite a lot as a way of challenging some of the racial politics, racial politics that others are arguing. So one of the accusations that is being labeled is being a class reductionist. And I think it's wrong to call somebody a class reductionist unless you're only talking about class, because people basically saying that you have to counter race with class. That's what the argument is about, as if it was two separate notion, two separate issue.
I see.
Class and race is linked at the end of the day. You
Right.
cannot separate class and class. So you cannot separate race and class in that way.
Right.
A lot of the working class. So a lot of the blacks were working class. I mean, now you have some middle class, upper class. But if you were black or some minorities, you are also working class.
Right.
So you cannot just contrapose class with race.
I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that, because earlier when you'd referenced his name, I wasn't sure what you were saying. So that's good. Thank you for that. And I would say, if anybody who calls him a class reductionist, I mean, he was canceled in 2020 by the DSA.
Yes, I don't.
Perfect example of why we can't have nice things on the left, right? This is he's obviously an important person right now. More people should read. So, all right. Is there anything else from the chat that you want to address before we close this thing out? I know you've got some food that your husband has prepared. I'm sure you are getting hungry by now.
No, he didn't know what he did. It's not that he has some food. He came to show me that he was eating.
Oh.
It's like, ew, I'm eating now. Thanks. Anyway, it's a joke between me and my husband. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, so, yeah. Yes. So he basically showed me that he's eating, not waiting for me. But I have to say, I am hungry. It's 9 o'clock for me, yeah? 9 o'clock at night.
9 p.m. for you?
Yeah, and I haven't eaten since lunchtime.
Okay, yeah, you probably should go get some food here pretty soon, huh?
And for you too, no? Is it lunchtime, no, for you?
It's lunchtime for me now, right? I had a little granola for breakfast, but it's with some berries in it, some fresh berries. That was nice. But yeah, no, it's we should probably wrap this up. I look forward to hopefully having a conversation someday in the future when I've reread your work and a bunch of other work in this, and we've had time to think about this and the questions that people have raised in chat. For anybody who did not have a response, you did not get your question responded to just yet, make sure to ask the question again in the actual comment section for this live stream, because I'm sure Christine will have an opportunity to look at it again in the future and think about it some more, either respond in the comments or in the future on stream. And obviously I'll be thinking about this stuff as well, and we'll come back to it. Because like you said, you wanted to get this conversation going. We need to have a serious conversation about what it would mean to radically transform society in a way You say abolishes class. I like to say abolishes bullshit jobs and shitty jobs. Right?
Abolishes.
Abolishing bullshit jobs and shitty jobs. Right? And there's still, I imagine in any society there will still be there will still be work to do. You know, but the question is how much of that can be automated and made not your entire life.
Yeah, I'm not against job as such. I mean, you know that, and I agree with oh God, I have a problem with name today, but I was reading this Marxism and something else with the oh God. Anyway, so I'm not against job as such. I think most of humanity wants to be active. So one of the reasons that gardening, I imagine, is so popular amongst retired people, it's because and I am I'm not retired, but I'm getting old. I'm getting so old. When I started to love gardening, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm part of this middle-aged old woman. I'm getting old because the beauty of gardening and is the product. You work and you have a product in your hands. I used to be a chambermaid. Like I said, I had a working class background, so I worked on a lot of those casual labor market. But even if I love reading and writing, when I was a chambermaid, I liked the job in the sense of you clean and you see the product of your activity.
Right.
And I think that this is what humans will. I can't imagine a society where we do not have an activity, because that's what this is important for humanity. The problems of a job today is that we are producing, and we do not get the benefits of our production, the product of the producing activity. So there is a dissociation between our producing activity and the result.
Right.
The benefits and the enjoyment of our productive activity. I think this is more of a. So that's what for me is that it's not that we don't want to work in the future. I think we want to work. It's how we enjoy our activity, our life, basically. The freedom to be able to produce something for the joy of doing it, for example. Do we, if you're an artist, you would like to be able to produce a painting without having to worry about how much it will cost and how much you can get out of it?
Right. Well, and I've said, there's a lot of these high-paying, salaried sort of PMC positions that, like priest and professor and journalist, for instance, that it serves a social function that would be necessary in any society. But, the point is like, we live in a society currently where someone's still got to clean the toilets, someone still has to dig the ditches, someone still has to tend to the sugar cane, the coffee beans, and that is currently that person's entire social destiny. That person does not have a way out of that. And the current education system almost serves just to leave people with the impression that, oh no, you deserve this because you didn't earn A's all the way through, blah, blah, blah. So people will still do the thing, we would still need yoga instructors in any future. We would still need professors, we still need these are roles that people will still feel called to. The question is, do they deserve? Should a person actually be able to think, oh, I'm above doing basic chores? Oh no, I'm
but your problem now is that you're looking at manual labor as something which is demeaning, and that's the thing. Is that the social division that we have today had to be explained by showing that the intellectual work is more important than or more, not only more important, but also more human, better, more kind of, something that you want to do. More, the intellectual work is put above the manual work. But this is why. Why should it be? Why is cleaning your toilet seen as worse than reading a book and writing an article for a journal that you're going to be paid $20 for an article or whatever, and then you clean and you will see yourself as more socially better than somebody's cleaning toilet for the same amount of money. Because manual labor was the labor that was given to the working class, the lower working class,
Mm-hmm.
and the manual labor is basically it's been put or understood as the labor that is demeaning, and the intellectual labor is the labor of the higher class or the middle class or the upper class as the good thing. But it's not intrinsic. The value of the manual labor and intellectual labor, it's not intrinsically good or bad.
No.
It's that we're in a society that is being bad. So I'm thinking in a new society, cleaning the toilet, if somebody wants to clean the toilet, I don't see it as more demeaning or not. It's more like when you're a worker, you have to sell your labor to be able to live. So it's not exactly what you do that is a problem. It's that you have to sell your labor to be able to live, and you get a wage. I think for me, it's the problem. If in a new society somebody wants to spend their day cleaning the toilet,
Great. Yeah. I mean, if I could thrive in a society just cleaning toilets, I would. I would listen to audiobooks. I would clean toilets. But the question is, well, I mean, my point would be, I don't think that should not consume all of my energy. I should still have energy and time to do other things still, right? The way things currently exist.
the reason why you consume your energy is because of the lower wage. So the people have to sell their labor, and they get a wage, and they have to work, and in places where people are very poor, they have to work long hours to be able to get enough of a wage to be able to live.
Right.
So it's not necessarily it's the whole system of selling your labor. It's not the job itself.
Right. No, and I've just to also be clear, I've also done this work, so I cleaned an inn.
Clean your toilets?
I cleaned toilets and changed bed sheets at an inn, and so almost all the jobs I've had were in the construction or food services, but I did work at a hotel or a motel, just doing this basic, but you're right. You work so long, you have to work so many hours, and you have no energy left with what little time you have left, and so that really that is the fundamental issue, I think, for me, for anybody stuck doing that kind of work. Yeah, it's the idea that it's lesser. It's no, I would it's obviously essential. We all presuppose that kind of labor, and I think a lot of people get their sense of status though by being above these other forms of labor, and it's like these are essential forms of labor. Why you're not above that, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, just think about it. When we had, the COVID, during the COVID things, you saw some of the badly paid jobs are the most essential jobs for us.
Right.
Imagine cities with no cleaners.
Mm-hmm.
You would not want to live in a society where people don't clean the street.
No.
And the people doing the plumbery and cleaning the street is not the most enjoyable job, at the end of the day, but they are essential. So there is, but they are seen as small jobs, badly paid jobs, bad jobs. If you're a cleaner, a street cleaner, you're not seen as an intellectual. This is kind of. Right. But there are essential jobs in a social world. Essential jobs. The one who could not go and stop working in factories producing, because the world is not only the West, there is also other world. All these people around the world working in factories were still carry on working in factories because they had to produce things, or working in the field, the farmers or people picking fruit. They still had to work. They're essential job.
100%. I think, well, hopefully that'll be one of the takeaways from the whole COVID period for people, is the realization that that there is such a thing as essential labor, that society actually has these base minimum requirements for its reproduction, and that those are honorable things. Those are honorable occupations in a sort of sense. But also, I also don't think the solution is simply to destigmatize it and to make it so it, a person gets paid more. They also need to have free time, and they also need to have time for their friends and their family and to do other things. And so, But all right. Well, I think we're at the point though that we had agreed to call this off. So I thank you so much for joining us from all the way in Germany, and for
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So I hope you'll have a good dinner.
Thank you for reading a book, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for discussing. It was very enjoyable.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry I talk a lot. You caught me in the day where I was talking. All day I was saying to my husband, his name is Andreas. I was saying, Andreas, I don't think I'm in the mood for talking today. I'm not sure how I'm going to talk for 2 hours. It's impossible. Now, I was wrong.
Oh, good. That's good. And
too much now.
And if you ever feel like you just really want to go off and vent or rant or theorize or develop your ideas, and you need an outlet, just message me and say, hey, I've got the itch. Let's do it, and we'll do it again.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes. Take care. And everybody in the chat,
bye.
Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the engagement. Make sure to ask your questions again in the comment sections of this live stream that will be available after this conversation. And look forward to doing more of these in the future with Dr. Christine Louis Dit-Sully. Make sure to check out her first book, Transcending Racial Divisions, Will You Stand By Me? It's a Zero Books. But it's probably one of the most important books that's been published by Zero Books. I say it's in the top 5 without a doubt. It's in probably the top 3. So get on it and go check it out.
You're very nice. Thank you very much.
Yes. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.